The captain said, "Mother of the passenger," like it still meant something, and that's when the lie unraveled midair. Still holding the phone, I watched the second candle on my birthday cake tremble beside the untouched plate. As his calm voice explained my son had fainted in first class, the smell of cold chicken grew thick in the quiet. While he asked for medical history, I remembered my daughter-in-law calling it an opportunity trip, like I should feel lucky for them. The same son who drained his father's memorial fund had written me as the emergency contact. That's when I knew I wasn't forgotten. I was insurance, not family. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Seattle mornings don't wake up so much as unfold gray on gray, rain threading down the window like the city is quietly erasing yesterday. I woke before my alarm anyway. Habit, hope. On birthdays, you don't expect miracles, but you do expect someone to show up. Dylan had said brunch. Marissa had said they'd make it cute. Caleb, my 7-year-old grandson with sticky hands and a laugh that always arrived a second before the joke was supposed to come too. I put on the soft cardigan I saved for company, brewed coffee even though I didn't need it, and set out plates like the house itself was preparing to be loved. By 10, the coffee had turned bitter on the warmer, and the silence had that hollow quality that makes rooms feel bigger than they are. I checked my phone again, pretending I was just being organized, not anxious. Then the voicemail notification appeared. Dylan's name sat on the screen like a weight. I pressed play. "Hey, Mom," he said, too bright, too fast. "Happy birthday. Listen, sorry. We had to take an opportunity trip. Kind of last minute. We'll make it up to you, okay? Love you. Bye." No Caleb yelling hello. No Marissa chiming in with her polished enthusiasm. Just the click of him ending the message like it was a routine errand. "Opportunity trip." I called him back once. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave anything. I didn't trust my voice not to expose how quickly my chest had tightened. Instead, I cleaned. I wiped a counter already clean. I folded the throw blanket on the couch into sharp edges like neatness could fix what abandonment broke. I moved Frank's photo us on the Bainbridge ferry, wind wrecking our hair, his grin wide enough to make the whole world feel simpler 2 inches to the left, then back again, because nothing looked right. Around noon, I opened my laptop and did what people do now when they want the truth without the conversation. I checked Instagram. Marissa's story loaded in a bright ring of color. There they were, Dylan in a crisp white shirt I'd never seen, Marissa angled into the camera like the lens owed her admiration. A champagne flute caught the cabin lights. The caption floated over it. "Finally, some luxury for a change." Next slide. Their seats wide, beige, the kind that turns into a bed. Another. Her manicured hand holding a glass. First class feels like therapy. My stomach didn't drop from envy. It dropped from recognition. In the corner of one post, like a careless flex, was a confirmation screenshot with a total that made my skin go cold, not because I knew the exact number, but because I knew the shape of it. The same shape as the fund I'd set aside in Frank's name. The memorial charity account Dylan had helped manage because he said he didn't want me handling it alone. I opened my banking app. The balance was lower than it should have been. Not emptied, just touched. Like someone had reached into something sacred and thought no one would notice. The landline rang, startling in the quiet. "Ellie," Joanne's voice came through warm and steady. "Happy birthday. Are they there yet? Are you being spoiled?" I looked at the untouched plates. The coffee gone stale. The chair across from me, empty. "Yes," I heard myself say. "They're on their way." A small pause, Joanne's way of seeing without pushing. "Mm-hmm," she murmured. "I'll swing by later. Save me a slice of whatever cake they bring." "Of course," I lied, because the truth felt too sharp to hold. That night, I ate reheated chicken with one candle burning low beside my plate, the flame trembling like it didn't trust the room. My phone lay face up on the table, silent until it buzzed once, hard enough to make the glass rattle. Unknown caller. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, and realized before I even answered that whatever waited on the other end wasn't an apology. It was the beginning of something I wouldn't be able to unknow. The phone buzzed again, hard enough to rattle the glass beside my plate. Unknown caller. I let it ring once more, pure stubbornness, like ignoring it could keep the night the same shape. But the second it stopped, it started again, and the candle flame dipped as if the room itself had flinched. I answered. Hello? A calm, male voice, practiced and careful. Mrs. Eleanor Hart? My full name from a stranger always made my spine go rigid. Yes. Who is this? This is Captain James Porter. I'm the captain of Delta Flight 491. There was a steady hum behind him, aircraft noise, distant and constant. Ma'am, I'm sorry to call you. We're en route to Doha, and I wouldn't disturb you unless it was important. My mind tried to catch up Doha. Flight number. Captain, then. My stomach did it for me. My son, I said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, Porter replied. A passenger on board Dylan Hart had a minor medical incident. He fainted. The word fainted hit like cold water. My fingers clenched around the phone until my hand ached. Is he conscious? I forced my voice steady, the way I used to. In my office, when a student's world was falling apart and they needed someone to sound unbreakable. He is now, Porter said. Our crew responded quickly. We also had a medical professional on board. He's stable at the moment, but we're monitoring him closely. Stable. A comfort word that still leaves room for fear. I swallowed. How did you get my number? We accessed his emergency contact information. Porter paused, then softened his tone in a way that felt almost personal. Your name wasn't just entered into the system, Mrs. Hart. It was handwritten. I closed my eyes. Dylan's handwriting flashed in my head round, hurried. The kind you learn in second grade and never quite outgrow. He wrote it. I murmured. Yes. Another beat, like he was deciding whether to add what came next. And when he came to, he asked for you. The room went strangely quiet, as if the rain outside had stopped to listen. He asked for his mother, Porter said. Lower now. Not dramatic, just honest. All day I'd been practicing being unneeded. And now, suspended above the ocean, my son had reached for me like I was still the first answer to fear. I gripped the edge of the table with my free hand. Does he have any medical conditions you need to know about? That's why I'm calling, Porter said. Ground, medical, asked about heart issues, fainting history, medications, anything relevant. If his condition worsens, we may have to consider diverting. Diverting. A whole plane changing course. No heart issues, I said. No chronic illness. He pushes himself when he shouldn't. I understand, Porter replied gently. If we need someone to meet the aircraft on arrival, or sooner, would you be able to come to the airport? My mouth went dry. I stared at the empty chair across from me, at the candle shrinking into its own wax. The day they'd abandoned me was asking something from me now. I started. My phone chimed. A new notification sliding across the screen from an airline number. Delta Medical. Please confirm passenger identity and authorize continued care. Reply yes to proceed. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, trembling just enough to notice. Because the moment I typed yes, I wasn't just answering a text. I was stepping back into the role they'd left me in, whether I wanted it or not. I didn't sleep much after that. The candle had burned itself down to a puddle of wax, and my dinner plate sat on the table like evidence from a life I'd briefly pretended was normal. At some point, I'd typed yes with a thumb that didn't feel attached to me, then stood at the sink staring into the dark window until my reflection looked like a stranger, an older woman in a cardigan, jaw tight, eyes too awake. Captain Porter called once more before midnight. Dylan was still stable. They'd keep monitoring him. No diversion for now. Thank you, I'd said. Like gratitude could cover what was really happening in my chest. After that, I turned my phone face down and sat in the quiet until the rain softened and the house settled into its familiar creaks. I finally went to bed the way you do after a funeral. Careful, slow, as if any sudden movement might make grief spill. Morning arrived in thin gray layers. I made coffee out of instinct, not desire. The first sip tasted like metal and tiredness. I set the mug down and reached for my phone, expecting against my better judgment some message from Dylan. Anything that sounded like I'm sorry instead of I needed you when I got scared. There was nothing from him. But there was a notification from Instagram, then another, then a flood of them. The way fireworks go off after you've already turned your head away. Marisa had posted. Not a story this time. Full photos, bright and permanent, as if she'd decided the internet would be their witness and their shield. The first image was Dylan, reclined in a wide seat, looking pale but still smiling the way he did when he wanted to look like everything was under control. Marissa leaned into him, lips pressed to his cheek, her eyes fixed on the camera. The caption sat underneath like a glittery knife. Birthday trip for my king. I stared at it long enough to feel something in me go very still. Not broken. Not numb. Still, the way water gets before it freezes. I swiped to the next photo, 2 flutes clinking, a plate of fruit arranged like jewelry. The next, Marissa's legs stretched out, designer sandals perched in the corner of the frame. The next, an airport lounge spread with food she hadn't cooked, comfort she hadn't earned, all of it presented like proof that they belonged somewhere better than my small kitchen. And then, buried between emojis and soft lighting, she posted something she shouldn't have. A screenshot cropped, careless of a payment confirmation. Most people would scroll past it. Most people would see only the glamour. But I'd spent decades reading teenagers' faces for what they weren't saying. You don't get that skill and then lose it. I zoomed in. I adjusted. The brightness. I held my breath. A date. A total. A partial account identifier. Not enough for a stranger to understand, more than enough for me. My fingers moved without hesitation. Screenshot. Another. And another. I captured every caption, every timestamp, every little detail she'd left behind in her need to be admired. I created an album in my photos and named it something neutral. Receipts. The word made me almost smile, except there was nothing funny about it. A message popped up from Joanne. You okay? Just 3 words. No judgment, no pressure. Joanne had always understood that the fastest way to make someone lie was to ask them to confess. I stared at the typing bubble that appeared when my thumb touched the screen. I could have written no. I could have finally told the truth. Instead, I wrote the only truth I trusted myself to hold. I'm clearer than ever. I hit send before I could soften it. Then I stood, walked to the small file cabinet in the hallway, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in months. Frank's name was written on the tab in my handwriting. Hart Memorial Fund. Beneath it, in smaller letters, the year. Inside was the original statement from when I set it up. Paper that felt heavier than it should. Dylan's signature sat near the bottom of one page, his promise, in ink, that he'd help administer it responsibly. I traced the curve of his D with a fingertip, not with nostalgia, but with the cool attention of someone examining a crack in a foundation. My sadness didn't flare into rage. It sharpened. There was a difference. Rage burns you. Precision protects you. I walked into my bedroom closet and knelt in front of the safe, tucked behind a row of shoes I rarely wore. The keypad beeped softly as I entered the code Frank and I had chosen years ago, Caleb's birthday. Back when we thought we'd have time to grow old without learning how to lock pieces of ourselves away. The door opened with a quiet sigh. Inside were passports, insurance papers, Frank's military medals, and the thick envelope marked estate. I pulled it out and carried it to the kitchen table like it was something fragile. I set it down where my birthday plate had been. The morning light fell across the paperwork in a pale stripe, illuminating names and numbers and decisions I'd made long ago under the assumption that love would behave like love. I opened the file, and there it was, Dylan's name. Neatly typed, waiting like an inheritance he'd already spent. My hand didn't shake as I reached for a pen, but my heart did something stranger than shaking. It steadied. The estate file sat open on my kitchen table like an accusation pages that had once meant security, now reading like a naive love letter. I didn't call Dylan. I didn't call Marissa. I knew what would happen if I did. Dylan would sound shaken, guilty in vague ways, and Marissa would steer the conversation toward feelings instead of facts. I wasn't interested in feelings. Not yet. I called Gina Walsh. She answered with her usual efficiency. Eleanor Hart. I need to see you today, I said. A brief pause. Gina was a good attorney, but she was an even better listener. 11 o'clock. Bring everything. Her downtown office was quiet in that expensive way, clean lines, soft lighting, not a single personal photo on the desk. Gina wore a gray blazer that looked like it had never wrinkled in its life. She set 2 coffees down without asking. Black. Strong. Like she remembered me from the last time I'd needed help untangling grief from paperwork. I laid the folder on her desk and slid my phone beside it. Open to the album I'd named Receipts. Gina didn't gasp. She didn't perform sympathy. She put on reading glasses and moved through the screenshots the way a surgeon studies scans. Captions, timestamps, the cropped payment confirmation Marissa had posted like a trophy. "This is the memorial account," she asked. "Yes. Give me your statements." I handed her the printed pages I'd pulled that morning. Gina scanned the columns, eyes narrowing once, then not at all. She circled a line item and turned it toward me. "There," she said. "This isn't a vague transfer. It's a vendor payment. Specific amount. Specific destination." She tapped the page. "Maldives travel." Hearing the words said out loud made something in my chest tighten, not with rage, but with disgust, like someone had used Frank's name to buy a better seat and thought I'd be too polite to notice. Gina leaned back, pen poised. "You could take this to court. Misappropriation? Potential fraud, depending on how the fund was structured. We can pursue recovery. Public record. Consequences." I waited for my body to crave the drama of that. The courtroom fantasy. The headlines. The satisfaction of watching them squirm. But what I felt was different. Court would make them central. It would give Dylan and Marissa a stage, and I was suddenly tired of being cast in their story. "No," I said. Gina blinked once. "No?" I shook my head. "I don't want to destroy them." A beat passed. Gina's eyes stayed on mine, measuring. "Then what do you want?" I folded my hands on the desk, steady as if I'd rehearsed this. "I'll make them irrelevant instead." Something like approval flickered across her face. She nodded, a small movement that felt like a door unlocking. "All right," she said. "Then we don't fight in the open. We restructure. We protect." She pulled out clean forms and started explaining in calm, precise terms. An irrevocable trust, assets moved out of reach, beneficiary lines rewritten with intent, not emotion. Her voice was clinical, but the effect was oddly soothing, like finally hearing the language of control after days of helplessness. She typed while I watched the cursor march across the screen. Names appeared, percentages. Dylan's name sat there like an assumption. Gina printed a page and slid it toward me. "Ready?" I picked up my pen. My hand didn't shake as I drew a single line through Dylan Hart. Gina didn't comment. She simply typed replacements. Foundations, scholarships, programs that would outlive mood swings and manipulation. We worked until the coffee went cold. When she placed the final page in front of me, the signature line looked less like paperwork and more like a boundary. I lifted the pen, and my phone buzzed on Gina's desk. A message from Dylan. "Mom, we need to talk." Dylan's text sat on Gina's desk like a hand reaching through the glass. "Mom, we need to talk." For a second, my body did what it had been trained to do for 40 years, prepare to soothe, to steady, to make space for someone else's panic. I could already hear his voice in my head, breathy, apologetic, vague. I could already see Marissa somewhere nearby, eyes sharp, listening for weakness she could turn into leverage. Gina watched me, not my phone. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I didn't pick the phone up. I didn't even turn it over. I kept my hands on the paper, in front of me ink, signatures, consequences. "I'm going to finish," I said. Gina nodded once, like she'd been waiting for that exact answer. She slid a fresh page forward and tapped the bottom line with her pen. "Then we make it formal. Irrevocable means irreversible. No late-night guilt, no tears at your doorstep. No, we didn't mean it when their credit card stops working." The word irreversible should have hurt. Instead, it felt like a clean bandage pulled tight. Gina reached for her phone and made one call. "I need a mobile notary in my office within the hour. And I need a witness." She looked up at me. "Who do you trust?" The name came out before I could overthink it. "Joanne." Joanne answered on the first ring. as if she'd been waiting beside her phone since yesterday. "Ellie, I need you downtown," I said. "Now. Wear something you'd wear to sign your life into place." There was a pause. Then, softly, "Okay, I'm coming." While we waited, Gina printed pages that smelled like hot toner and finality. She explained in her measured voice what each document did, but I barely needed the translation. I'd counseled teenagers through consequences for years. I knew how a single choice could rearrange a future. "You're appointing an executor," she said, sliding that sheet forward. "Someone to carry out your intentions without being manipulated." My pen hovered. Joanne arrived with rain on her shoulders and concern in her eyes. But she didn't ask for a story. She simply sat beside me like a pillar. When Gina placed the executor page in front of me, I looked at Joanne. "Can you do this?" Joanne's mouth tightened equal parts, sadness and steel. "Ellie, I've returned library books people borrowed in 1998. I can handle your son." A laugh tried to rise in me and came out as something smaller, thinner. But it was real. "Then sign here," Gina said to Joanne. Joanne's signature was neat, confident. Mine followed, steady as if my hand belonged to someone calmer than my heart. Next came the line that mattered most. Gina turned the page so I had to look straight at it. The list of beneficiaries. The places my money would go when I no longer could decide. Dylan's name was already gone. The space where it used to sit filled with programs and foundations that didn't post champagne selfies. A scholarship in Frank's name. A counseling fund at my old high school. A widow support organization on the Seattle waterfront I'd quietly donated to for years. "No family access?" Gina asked one last time, giving me a final exit ramp. I didn't take it. "No family access," I repeated. The notary arrived in a navy coat, polite and brisk, carrying a stamp like a small gavel. She checked my ID, checked Joanne's, checked Gina's witness signature. Her professionalism made it feel less like revenge and more like procedure, which was exactly what I wanted. Not a scene, a decision. "Please sign," she said. I signed the trust documents. Page after page. My name, my initials, my intent. Then Gina slid the deed transfer across the desk, the paper heavier than the others. "My home?" I asked, hearing the question like it belonged to a different woman. "You wanted them irrelevant," Gina said gently. "A home is leverage. You remove leverage, you remove performance." I thought of Dylan's childhood feet running down that hallway. I thought of Frank building the back steps with his own hands. I thought of the quiet way the house held my grief like it was part of the furniture. And then I thought of Marissa's caption, "My king," and the way Frank's memorial money had been treated like a vacation fund. My pen touched the page. I signed. The notary stamped, the ink sharp and final, and for a moment the sound of it thunk felt like a door closing somewhere deep inside me. Gina turned her monitor slightly toward me. A flight tracking map was open, a little airplane icon moving across a blue field. "Delta 491, she said, still at cruising altitude, 30,000 feet. A small dot above an ocean I couldn't name, carrying my son and his wife toward their luxury. I watched the icon inch forward while the last of my signatures dried. Watched it begin, almost imperceptibly, to angle downward. "Descent," Gina murmured, more to herself than to me. Joanne squeezed my hand once, one tight, grounding press. And right as the plane on the screen started dropping toward land, my phone buzzed again on the desk. Not a call. A new text from Dylan. "We're landing soon. Please don't be mad." They came back the way people return from vacations they think they've earned. Bright-eyed, sun-warmed, carrying bags like proof. 2 days after Gina's office, my doorbell rang. Seattle was doing its gray thing. Rain misting the porch. Dylan and Marissa looked like they'd stepped out of a glossy ad anyway. Dylan wore a new jacket, soft and fitted. Marissa had oversized sunglasses pushed up in her hair even though there was no sun to fight. Caleb wasn't with them. That absence hit me first, clean and quiet, like a missing note in a familiar song. "Mom," Dylan said, arms opening wide, already trying to hug the week back into place. Marissa stepped past him with a bright shopping bag and a long, narrow box. Her smile was camera-ready. "Surprise, we brought you something from paradise." I let my face settle into polite calm. The same expression I used to wear in my counseling office when students were testing boundaries. "Come in," I said. They walked into my living room like the house was an extension of their lives, like the walls hadn't held years of small sacrifices they'd never noticed. Dylan's eyes flicked around, fast, assessing. Marissa's gaze skimmed past Frank's photo as if it were clutter. She set the narrow box on the coffee table with a flourish. "Open it." I didn't rush. I sat first, smoothed my cardigan, then lifted the lid. A silk scarf, turquoise with gold threading. Pretty. Expensive. It smelled faintly of perfume and duty-free air. "It's beautiful," I said, because it was. Then I looked up, my tone light as tea. "How'd you afford it?" Silence spread like a stain. Dylan's smile twitched. Marissa's eyes cut to him quick. Sharp, then back to me. Her expression still bright, but suddenly tighter. "Afford it?" she echoed with a little laugh that didn't land. "Eleanor, it's not—" "We found some deals," Dylan cut in, too fast. "Points. You know, points." I nodded slowly, as if I were considering the idea in good faith. As if I hadn't seen the screenshots. As if I hadn't read the statements. As if my pen hadn't already changed the shape of their future. "That's smart," I said. Relief flickered across Marissa's face. She reached into the bag and pulled out a small jar with a label in a language I didn't recognize. "And this is from a local market." "Thank you," I said, gently closing the moment with my voice the way you close a door without slamming it. Dylan sat on the edge of the couch, leaning forward. "Mom, about the other day, about your birthday." "You must be exhausted," I interrupted softly. "Jet lag is brutal." Marissa's smile snapped back into place, grateful for the escape. Dylan hesitated, searching my face for the mother who always made things easier. I gave him none of that. I stood, picked the scarf up, and set it back in the box. "Excuse me, I need to check something upstairs." Dylan started to rise. "Mom, I'll be right back," I said, still polite. Upstairs, I closed my bedroom door and let myself breathe once, slow and controlled. Below, their voices floated up in muffled bursts. "Why did she ask that?" Marissa hissed. "I don't know," Dylan whispered back. "Just be normal." Normal? Like it was a sweater you could pull on over guilt. I waited long enough for the silence to start working on them, then came back down with my calm intact. "I've got a headache," I said. "I'm going to lie down. Thank you for coming by." They left with their smiles stretched thin. Dylan lingered on the porch, eyes pleading. I didn't follow him. That night, when the house was quiet, again, I carried the glossy gift bag and bright tissue paper to the fireplace. I crumpled the wrapping once, then fed it to the grate. The flames caught fast, licking up tropical colors like they were dry leaves. My phone lit up on the mantel. An unfamiliar number. "This is Captain Porter. Are you safe at home?" I stared at Captain Porter's text on the mantel until the screen dimmed. "Are you safe at home?" It wasn't, "Are you okay?" The way people ask when they want a story. It was a check-in, like he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. I typed back, "Yes. Thank you." I slept lightly. The smell of burned tissue paper still faint in the room, like the house had absorbed what I refused to say out loud. The next morning, the mail arrived with its usual dull thud bills, a grocery flyer, a postcard from a dentist I didn't use anymore, then an envelope that didn't match the rest. Thick paper, crisp print, Delta Airlines in the corner. My stomach tightened with an old reflex, like I'd done something wrong. I opened it at the kitchen counter. "Dear Mrs. Hart, thank you for taking the time to report the disrespectful conduct that occurred aboard Flight 491. I read it twice before the words settled. Reported? I hadn't filed a complaint. I hadn't even thought about it. I'd been too busy holding my face together, signing papers, learning how to breathe around betrayal without letting it show. The letter referenced an incident, a case number, and a bland apology written by someone who didn't know any of our names beyond what was in a database. It offered assurances and corporate sympathy and an implied promise that someone, somewhere, would be addressed. Someone else had complained. and my name was on it. I called Joanne. You okay? She asked immediately, like she'd been waiting for the shoe to drop. I got a letter from Delta, I said. They're thanking me for reporting disrespectful conduct on Dylan's flight. A pause. You didn't. No. Joanne exhaled slowly, the way she did when she was trying to keep her own anger from spilling into mine. Then someone heard something ugly. Before I could answer, my phone rang. A real number this time. Mrs. Hart? Captain Porter's voice. Calm. Low. Like he'd stepped into a quiet corner to make the call. It's Eleanor, I said. I won't keep you, he replied. But I wanted you to know. I heard about the complaint, and I figured it wasn't from you. My grip tightened on the phone. What happened? He took a breath, the faint hum of an aircraft somewhere behind his voice. I was in the aisle during service. I overheard your daughter-in-law. The phrase, your daughter-in-law, sounded careful in his mouth, like he didn't want to hand me something sharp. She was joking. He continued, controlled but unmistakably unsettled. With another passenger, about leaving you behind, about how you'd get over it, and about the money, about how you wouldn't notice. For a moment, my kitchen went completely still, as if even the refrigerator had decided to listen. It should have hurt like a slap. It did, in a way. But it also clicked something into place. All week, I'd been trying not to assume the worst. All week, I'd been giving them imaginary chances they hadn't asked for. Now I had the truth from a man with no reason to dramatize it. When I spoke, my voice came out soft, almost gentle, because softness can be a blade when it's backed by certainty. Then that's your answer, I said. There was silence on the line. Not awkward. Shared. I'm sorry, Porter said finally. I didn't want you left wondering. You did the right thing, I told him, and I meant it. After we hung up, I sat at the table with a blank note card and a pen. My handwriting didn't shake as I wrote. Not all captains fly planes. Some land truths. Thank you. When Joanne came later, she read the Delta letter and let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Ellie, she said, eyes wide with something like admiration. You're dangerous when polite. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Marissa. Hey, quick question. Did you change anything with your accounts? Dylan's card isn't working. Marissa's text sat on my screen like a cheerful sticker slapped over a crack. I didn't reply. I rinsed my mug, wiped the counter, and let the silence do its work. People reveal their true urgency when you don't rush to meet it. A couple hours later, there was a knock. Soft, careful, the kind you use when you want to be welcomed. Not the impatient pounding of someone who feels entitled. Dylan stood on my porch with his shoulders slightly raised, like he was bracing for a storm. Marissa was beside him, perfectly composed, hair smooth, earrings catching the gray light. No gifts this time. No scarf, just that tight smile that said she'd rehearsed. Mom, Dylan said gently. Can we talk? Of course, I said, stepping aside. They walked in like the house belonged to a version of them they were trying to return to. Dylan's eyes scanned for anger. Marissa's eyes scanned for weakness. I led them to the kitchen because it was the only room that felt honest. The table still had a faint wax stain from my birthday candle, a small mark that refused to disappear. Coffee? I asked. Dylan nodded too quickly. Yeah? Sure. Marissa shook her head. No, thank you. I poured 2 mugs anyway, one for him, one for me. I didn't reach for a third. I've got banana bread, I added, opening the bread box. Want a slice? Marissa's smile twitched. We're fine, we shouldn't. Shouldn't? As if food was a trap. Dylan cradled his mug like it was something to do with his hands. Mom, we've been worried. I looked at him over the rim of my cup. Steam curled between us, softening nothing. Worried, I repeated. Yeah, he said. After the flight. After I fainted. We didn't want you upset. We've been checking in. Marissa leaned forward slightly, the supportive wife. We just want to make sure you're okay, Eleanor. I set my mug down carefully. Not hard, just final. Really? I asked, eyes lifting to both of them. Worried about me or the paperwork? The air changed. Dylan's mouth opened and closed. His gaze flicked to Marissa like a reflex. Marissa held her smile for a beat too long. Then it stiffened. "What paperwork?" she asked. Too innocent. Too fast. "The paperwork you keep circling," I said calmly. "The accounts you suddenly can't access. The cards that aren't working." Color rose in Dylan's face. "Mom, that's not—" Marissa's hand landed lightly on his forearm, stopping him without looking like she was controlling him. "Eleanor," she said sweetly, "if something got mixed up, we can fix it. Families figure things out. Families." A curtain she expected me to hide behind. "Families don't take from a memorial fund," I said softly. Dylan flinched and stared at the table. Marissa's sweetness thinned. "You're misunderstanding." "I'm not," I said. "And I'm not debating it." Dylan's voice went small. "We were going to pay it back." That's what people say when they get caught, I thought, but I didn't give him the line. Marissa's jaw tightened. "If you changed things legally, we need to know." I leaned back. "Where is Caleb?" Dylan blinked. "With my sister. For a few days. So he wouldn't hear this," I realized. So they could negotiate without witnesses. I stood up. "We're done here," I said, mid-sentence, mid-performance. For a second, they didn't move, like they couldn't imagine a door closing quietly. Then Dylan rose, mug untouched. Marissa's eyes narrowed, cold now. At the entryway, she turned back. "You're making a mistake," she said. "People don't like women who punish their families." I opened the door wider. Good thing I'm not doing this to be liked. They stepped into the drizzle. Dylan paused on the porch, waiting for me to soften. I didn't. When I shut the door, my phone buzzed on the table, Gina's name on the screen. "Trust recorded. Deed transfer official. Do not engage further." Gina's text sat on my screen like a gavel. "Trust recorded. Deed transfer official. Do not engage further." I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand, but because part of me still expected the world to bend back into the shape Dylan preferred, a mother who softened, a woman who negotiated her own boundaries until there was nothing left but politeness. Then my landline rang. Gina's office number. "Eleanor," she said, voice low. "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Good. Listen carefully." Paper rustled on her end. I had my tech team review the login metadata from the memorial account. We traced the access to a device signature tied to Dylan's office computer. For a moment, my brain refused to translate. Then it did, and the kitchen felt smaller. He hadn't stumbled into it. He hadn't made a mistake. He'd sat at work at his desk, in his professional life, and moved money that never belonged to him. "Are you sure?" I asked, hating how quiet my voice sounded. "As sure as a digital trail allows without subpoenas," Gina said. "But it's enough for the next step." "What next step?" "A fraud alert," she replied. Quiet, professional. Through his company's HR compliance. If corporate equipment was involved, they need to know. I thought of Dylan in meetings, smiling like reliability was his natural state. I'd spent years polishing that image in my own head, even when he didn't earn it. Gina didn't let me drift into guilt. "This isn't revenge, it's consequence. And it's protection." An hour later, I was in her downtown office again, watching her assemble the evidence into a neat stack of truth statements, timestamps, screenshots, her team's analysis. Betrayal looked horrifyingly clean when filed correctly. "All you have to do is sign," she said, sliding the document toward me. "No emotion, just facts." My pen hovered for a heartbeat. Then I signed. 2 days later, Joanne called, voice sharp with contained satisfaction. "Ellie, you sitting down? Dylan's promotion suspended. Pending investigation. Carla from his company let it slip at the library." I closed my eyes. It wasn't jail or headlines, but it was something he couldn't hug his way out of. That afternoon, Marissa's social media pivoted hard. Black and white selfies, captions about boundaries, quote, graphics about narcissistic parents, a long post dripping with victimhood that never used my name but didn't need to. My phone buzzed Dylan. "Mom, this is getting out of hand. Can we talk like adults?" I set it down without answering. That evening, another message arrived, Captain Porter. Eleanor, I'm on the board for a charity gala Women in Recovery. Would you consider speaking? I stared at it, feeling something unfamiliar rise in me. Not fear, not rage, purpose. Yes, I typed. This time, I'll use my story, not my silence. The gala was in a downtown hotel ballroom that smelled like polished wood and expensive flowers, peonies, arranged like someone had tried to buy hope in bulk. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I didn't want to be rushed into courage. Captain Porter met me near a side entrance, in a dark suit that made him look less like a pilot, and more like a man who carried responsibility quietly. You ready? He asked. I looked past him at the room, linen-covered tables, soft lights, women in dresses that looked like survival more than vanity. I'm here, I said. That's the same thing. Back behind a velvet curtain, someone clipped a microphone to my blouse. My hands stayed calm, but my heartbeat didn't. When the host announced my name, the applause was polite at first, the kind people give before they know whether they're supposed to feel anything. I stepped into the light. I'm Eleanor Hart, I said, letting the room settle. And I used to believe being gracious meant being quiet. Heads lifted. The room leaned in. I spent my career counseling teenagers, I continued. I taught them boundaries. I taught them self-respect. And then, in my own life, I confused tolerance with love. A hush spread, heavy with recognition. Grace, I said, is not letting people hurt you politely. Grace is choosing not to become cruel when someone else is. I paused. But grace without boundaries is just permission. And I don't give permission anymore. I didn't name Dylan. I didn't name Marissa. I refused to make them the center of my story. I spoke about widows who are treated like afterthoughts. About older women expected to shrink so everyone else feels comfortable. About family who confuses access with entitlement. Then I said the line I'd been carrying for weeks, the one that had hardened into something clean. I can forgive, I told them, but I will not fund cruelty. For a beat, the room went perfectly still. Then applause rose. Real this time, rolling forward like a wave. I felt it in my chest, not as praise, but as proof that I wasn't alone in what I'd lived. When I stepped off the stage, my knees went weak in that delayed way adrenaline leaves you. Captain Porter caught my elbow lightly, steadying without taking over. You're the calmest storm I've met, he said, voice low with respect. I exhaled something close to a laugh. I'm trying to be weather, not a wildfire. He smiled. We streamed it, he added. Just so you know. I did know. Somewhere, Dylan watched from home, pale in the blue light. Marissa sat beside him, scrolling fast, already shaping a narrative. By morning, local articles featured my name founder of a new fund for widows and single mothers, and my mailbox began to fill with handwritten thank yous. Among them sat one cream envelope with a corporate logo Dylan's company. Notice of investigation outcome enclosed. The cream envelope from Dylan's company had been the first domino. Inside was corporate language built to say everything without admitting it had teeth. Administrative leave, access suspended, pending review. No details, just confirmation that consequences had found his desk. 2 weeks later, the second domino arrived. A court date. Dylan and Marissa filed a petition, an attempt to challenge what I'd changed, to pry back open doors I'd already closed. Gina didn't sound surprised when she told me. They expected you to fold, she said. This is them checking if your no is real. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor polish, the kind of place where people speak softer because the walls have heard worse. Gina sat beside me in a charcoal suit, files arranged like surgical tools. I wore a plain blouse and my calm like armor. Across the aisle, Dylan sat with Marissa. She'd dressed for sympathy, soft color, hair tucked behind one ear, hands folded as if she'd practiced looking wronged. Dylan looked smaller than I remembered. Shoulders rounded, eyes darting the way they had when he was 13 and waiting to see if he could talk his way out of trouble. He kept trying to catch my gaze. I didn't give it to him. Marissa's attorney opened with performance. Family misunderstanding. Elder influence. Hasty decisions made under emotional distress. He said, My name like it meant fragile. Gina waited, unblinking. When it was her turn, she stood with her hands relaxed and her voice steady enough to make the theatrics look childish. Your Honor, she began. This is not a misunderstanding. This is documentation. She moved through the facts like a straight line. Transaction logs, timestamps, account identifiers. She didn't accuse with emotion. She showed. Printouts went to the clerk, then to the judge. The memorial account payments sat there in black and white vendor names, dates, amounts. Not a slip. A pattern. Then Gina introduced the social media posts. Marissa's captions appeared glossy photos, smug little lines about luxury, the careless cropped confirmation image, the birthday trip for my king that looked cute until it sat beside misused funds. Motive didn't have to be guessed when it was posted with a heart emoji. Dylan's attorney tried to pivot. He intended to repay. Gina's voice stayed level. Intending to repay is not permission to take. Dylan's head dipped. Marissa's jaw tightened, the sympathy costume cracking at the seams. When the judge spoke, her tone wasn't warm or cruel, just final. Petition denied. 2 words like a door closing. Dylan's face fell. Marissa turned to him, eyes sharp with anger, not at what they'd done, but that it had happened publicly. I kept my gaze forward, not out of spite, out of discipline. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Later, an article called me dignified beyond vengeance. As I stepped into the misting rain, my phone buzzed. A text from Captain Porter. Coffee somewhere quiet? I know a marina cafe that doesn't ask questions. The Marina Cafe was the kind of place Seattle hides on purpose, tucked behind boat slips and weathered pilings, smelling like espresso and salt and old wood that had learned to stand through storms. I arrived with my shoulders still tight from the courthouse, still bracing for impact that never stopped coming. Captain Porter James now was already there by the window. Outside, masts nodded in the breeze. The water spread wide, gray-blue, patient. Eleanor, he said, standing. James, I corrected myself, and he smiled like that mattered. We ordered coffee and sat in the quiet, letting the hum of the cafe do what silence at home couldn't hold without echoing. He watched me for a moment. You look steady. I feel tired, I said. But it's a cleaner kind of tired. James nodded, fingers circling his mug. I saw the courthouse clip, he said. The way you didn't even look at them. If I looked at Dylan, he'd think he had a way back in, I replied. If I looked at her, she'd think she'd want a reaction. His gaze stayed on me, calm and direct. You could have destroyed them. The word destroyed sounded like fire, like drama, like the thing people expect when they hear the word revenge. I shook my head. No, I just stopped funding their comfort. Something softened in his face, respect mixed with sadness. That's a different kind of power. It doesn't feel like power, I admitted. It feels like setting down something I carried too long. He leaned back, eyes drifting to the water. I didn't speak to my mother for years, he said quietly. Not because she stole, not because she was cruel. Pride, distance. The illusion I was fine without her. My throat tightened. And then I got a call. She was in the hospital. His jaw set. By the time I landed, she barely knew me. I told myself I'd fix it. I didn't. The marina outside kept moving, waves tapping the pilings like time's metronome. I'm sorry, I said. He nodded, accepting it without collapsing. That's why I called you on that flight, he said. I heard what was said, and I thought, I don't want another mother waiting by a phone that never rings. I stared at the water, sunlight starting to thread through the clouds. I thought being a good mother meant absorbing everything, I said. Making excuses so he didn't have to grow up. And now? James asked. Now I think it means letting him meet himself, I said, surprised by how clean the words felt. Letting him see what he chose. James's voice went soft. Maybe peace is your final inheritance. Outside, the fading sun broke across the water in broken gold closure in motion. Not a slam of a door, but a slow release. As we stood to leave, my phone buzzed in my purse. An email from Dylan's address. I didn't open Dylan's email in the parking lot. Not because I was afraid of what it would say, but because I'd learned finally that urgency was how he kept me compliant. A crisis, a plea, a before you decide forever. As if forever was something only I did. And he simply reacted. I drove home with the marina's salt still on my skin and the sun breaking through clouds like the world was trying to be kind without promising it would stay that way. Inside my house, the quiet greeted me the way it always had. Honest, a little lonely, but no longer accusatory. I set my keys down, hung my coat, and did a small thing that mattered more than it should have. I fed the cat next door, that Joanne sometimes checked on when the neighbors traveled. Routine, as a lifeline. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. Dylan's subject line glared back at me like a dare. Please read, before you decide forever. I clicked. His email wasn't long, but it was dense words pressed together like he'd written it in one breath. Mom, I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm still trying to get something from you, so I'm going to try to just tell the truth. I waited for excuses, for blame, for Marissa's influence to be used like an alibi. Instead, the next line hit me with the bluntness of someone finally admitting they'd been living in a lie. I took the money. No borrowed. No moved. No misunderstood. Took. He wrote about the first time how Marissa had shown him the Maldives packages on her phone like they were destiny, how she'd laughed and said, "Your mom won't even notice." How he'd felt that familiar weakness in himself, the need to keep her happy so she wouldn't turn her disappointment into contempt. He wrote about sitting at his office computer after hours, heart racing, telling himself he'd put it back before anyone saw. He wrote about how easy it felt once he crossed the line, the second transfer coming faster, the guilt getting quieter, the rationalizations getting louder. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I deserved one good thing after working so hard. I told myself you'd understand. I didn't even ask because I knew what you'd say. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. This wasn't grief. It was confirmation. He wrote about fainting on the plane and waking up panicked, calling for me like a child and then feeling shame wash over him when he remembered what he'd done. I left you alone on your birthday and I knew it was wrong. I still did it. I still posted. I still let her make jokes. And when you didn't answer, I got angry at you like you were the one punishing me. That's how twisted my thinking got. The honesty wasn't noble. It was ugly. But it was finally honest. Near the end, his words softened, not into manipulation, but into something smaller, raw. I'm sorry, Mom. Not sorry I got caught. Sorry I became the kind of person who could do this to you and to Dad's memory. Then came the part that made my stomach drop in a different way. I'm sending a check. It doesn't fix what I did, but it's the money back and more. I don't want you to think I'm asking for anything by sending it. I'm not. I just can't live with it sitting in my life like it's mine. A PDF attachment sat at the bottom. A scanned cashier's check. The amount was enough to cover the stolen memorial funds, and then some in overcorrection. A desperate attempt at symmetry. I stared at it for a long time. This was the twist I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. Dylan not pleading, not threatening, not hiding, confessing. And yet, nothing in my chest shifted toward reconciliation. Because confession doesn't rewind the harm. It only names it. The next morning, I drove to my credit union, the one near the lake with the faded mural of Mount Rainier on the wall. The teller recognized me, small community kindness, and asked how my day was. Productive, I said. I handed over the check, endorsed neatly. When she asked what account to deposit it into, I didn't hesitate. The scholarship fund, I said. For widows. Her eyebrows lifted. Impressed, without understanding. Of course. Walking back to my car, I felt the strangest relief. Not because Dylan had made it right. He hadn't. But because he'd finally handed back what he'd stolen control over the meaning of it. That afternoon, I opened the document on my laptop labeled Memoir Draft, a file I'd started as a private journal and never intended anyone to read. The cursor blinked, patient. I typed one sentence, clean and true. Some debts repay differently. A week later, at a small local reading, just a quiet room in a bookstore near the waterfront, James sat in the second row, hands folded, listening like every word mattered. When I finished, he clapped first. Not loud, just steady. Joanne came up after, eyes shining, and wrapped me in a hug that smelled like rain and library paper. "You finally wrote the ending yourself," she whispered into my hair. I held her tight, looking past her shoulder at the crowd women I didn't know, nodding like my story had given theirs a place to stand. And my phone buzzed in my pocket with a new email notification from Marissa. Subject line: "You can't keep Caleb from us." Marissa's email sat unopened for a full day. Not because I didn't see it, but because I'd learned the difference between an emergency and an attempt to seize the steering wheel. Caleb mattered. That was exactly why I wouldn't let Marissa use him as a lever. Gina handled the response in a single, clean letter. Visitation was not being denied. It was being structured. Communication would go through counsel. No threats. No late-night emails. No emotional bargaining disguised as family concern. When I read Gina's draft, I felt something loosen in my chest. The relief of rules. A month later, my story had a spine. It started as a slim manuscript journal entries turned into chapters with Joanne's quiet encouragement and Gina's insistence that I never name names I couldn't prove. I called it Altitude of Silence, because the worst things that had happened to me hadn't happened in my living room or my kitchen. They'd happened in that thin air above the ocean, where my daughter-in-law felt safe enough to laugh about leaving me behind. A small Seattle publisher took it. Then a bigger one asked for distribution. Then the morning show wanted a segment on reinventing later life. Every time someone used that phrase, I wanted to correct them. This wasn't reinvention. It was reclamation. The book hit regional bestseller lists in the Pacific Northwest in a way that surprised everyone, including me. People think older women's stories are gentle. They think we write about gardens and grandchildren and soft forgiveness. They forget what we've survived. Letters began arriving again, but these weren't just thank yous. They were confessions from strangers, women who'd been drained by adult children, women who'd been told they were selfish for keeping their own money, women who'd been taught that boundaries were cruelty. I took the first royalty check and did what I'd promised myself I would. I gave it away. Not all of it, Gina insisted I keep enough to be safe, but a large portion went straight into programs that helped women rebuild after betrayal. Housing grants, legal aid, emergency funds, a scholarship that didn't require anyone to deserve help in a way the world approved of. When people asked why, I told them the truth. Because money is loud, I'd say. And I'd like it to say something better than it used to. One rainy Tuesday, I went to a bookstore downtown to sign stock, just a stack of copies behind the counter, my name written in steady ink. I didn't do announcements anymore. I didn't need applause. I liked the quiet proof more than the noise. As I finished signing, I felt a presence behind me, not the intrusive kind, but hesitant, familiar. I turned. Dylan stood in the aisle with a copy of Altitude of Silence in his hands. No Marissa, no performance. He looked older than 40, like the last few months had finally collected their interest. He didn't speak right away. His eyes were on the cover, then on my face, then back down again, as if he couldn't quite settle on where he was allowed to look. "I'm not here to..." His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. "I just wanted to read it." I nodded once. "Okay." There was no argument left in me. No lecture waiting in my mouth. He wasn't a boy I could fix with guidance. He was a man learning, too late, that love is not a bottomless account. He swallowed. "It's honest." "Yes," I said. He held the book tighter, like it weighed more than paper. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not as a tactic this time, but as someone finally speaking to the damage without trying to undo it with words. I didn't answer with forgiveness or rejection. I simply let the silence stand between us, earned, necessary. Dylan nodded to himself, like he'd expected that, then turned and walked out, disappearing into the drizzle outside. No anger, no threat. Just the quiet recognition that some things don't get patched back to what they were. That night, I checked Marissa's social media out of habit and found nothing. No posts, no captions. Her profile still existed, but it was scrubbed clean, like she'd realized the internet couldn't protect her from the truth once it had a spine. A week later, James met me at another small reading, this one, in a library auditorium with a view of the water. When I stepped down from the podium, He was waiting with that same steady look. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said. A teenage girl stood behind him, maybe 15, hair pulled into a ponytail, eyes bright with the kind of admiration that isn't trying to take anything from you. She held my book against her chest like it mattered. "This is my daughter, Lila," James said. She wanted to meet her hero. The word made me want to protest, but Lila's expression was so earnest it stopped me. "Hi," she said, a little breathless. "My dad told me what you did. I didn't know grown-ups could do that. Like choose themselves and still be good." My throat tightened in a place that was softer than grief. I smiled at her, and it felt real. "Tell her to keep flying," I said to James, then looked back at Lila. "Tell yourself too. Don't let anyone shrink your world." Lila nodded hard, as if she was storing the words for later. As they walked away, my phone buzzed with an email notification. From Dylan. Subject line: "Caleb asked about you today." Dylan's email sat in my inbox. "Caleb asked about you." Today, and for once, it didn't pull me off balance. I read it that night, alone with rain tapping the windows like soft fingers. It was short. No demands. No bargaining. "He asked if you still like the marina. He asked if you're mad at me. I told him you're not mad. You're just hurt. If you ever want to see him, tell Gina. I'll respect it." I closed the laptop and breathed through the ache the way you breathe through cold water, slow, deliberate, refusing to drown in it. The next morning, I called Gina and told her to arrange something small, structured, safe. A visit with Caleb in a public place, with clear start and end times. Not because I wanted a war, but because I wanted a map. Then I opened my safe and pulled out my passport. It felt strange in my hands, like a part of me I'd forgotten existed. Joanne had given me a voucher the week before, travel points she'd hoarded like treasure, along with a note that read, "For the woman who kept everyone else safe, your turn." So I booked a flight. Not to prove anything. Not to post it. Not to make anyone jealous. Just because I wanted to sit above the clouds once in my life and feel what it was like to choose myself without apology. SeaTac buzzed with rolling suitcases and boarding calls. The faint smell of cinnamon pretzels and jet fuel. I moved through it in a soft sweater and comfortable shoes, carrying a small suitcase I'd packed carefully, like I was packing for a version of myself I respected. At the gate, my boarding pass said something I'd never seen beside my name: first class. When I boarded, the cabin looked like those photos Marissa had posted. Wide seats, warm lights, quiet corners. But it felt different in real life. Less like a trophy and more like a room you were allowed to enter if you decided you were worthy of comfort. A flight attendant glanced at her tablet and smiled. "Mrs. Hart? Welcome aboard." The way she said my name, gentle, clean, made something loosen in my chest. "Thank you," I said. And my smile surprised me by being real. As we pushed back, Seattle waited outside the window, gray edges soft under cloud cover. The engines rose into a steady roar, and the plane lifted, the city shrinking into lines and silver water. Then the clouds swallowed everything, and there was only white. I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote one sentence, neat and final: "Revenge ends where peace begins." A sparkling water arrived in a glass, ice clinking like a small ceremony. I caught my reflection in the window, older, yes, but not diminished. I raised the glass to that woman, not to my regrets. Sunlight broke through above the clouds, warm and honest, touching my face. I closed my eyes and let it land. They left me alone on my birthday to fly luxury, but I learned to fly higher, without them.